Hey guys, so in the last video we looked at variables, and I said that in this video we'd be looking at functions, but before that I just want to cover one more type of variable, and that's address. So this is something I forgot to mention in the last video, but basically an address variable is how you would store a wallet address. And I'll show you how to get wallet addresses from the user who interacts with the contract and stuff like that later on. But for now, let's start working with functions. So a good way to visualize how the two different types of functions work, remember I told you there's a read function and a write function. So we're going to create a variable called mynum, and we'll just set it to 0 by default. So let's talk about the two different types of functions. The first is a read function, and this is the same as if we set a variable to public here. So if you remember, when we set a variable to public, we can just click on it from our contract and get the value that's stored inside. So a read function is basically free. It doesn't cost any gas, even if it was on an actual blockchain. And then we have write functions. So this will actually be used to change data that's inside of a variable or something on a blockchain. And write functions are the stuff that does use gas. So I'll show you how to create those two different types of functions using this uint variable here. So we'll create a read function to read the value of this. Remember, this is not public, so we're not going to have a button to click on here. But we're going to make a public read function that will return the value that's in here, and then we'll make a write function to increase the value that's in here. So let's start by creating the write function, since that's a bit easier to make. So we'll use the keyword function, and we'll call this function increase number, and then we just add our our regular parentheses. So after this we need to specify that it's a public function. I know in other programming languages we declare that it's public at the beginning, but in Solidity we have to do that here. And then we add in our curly braces. So here we just put in the code that we want to run inside of our function. So whenever a user runs this function, the code in here will run. And we're just going to increment mynum by 1. So we can do mynum ++, but I'm just going to write it out the full way so that it's easier to read for us. So mynum is equal to mynum +1. And don't forget to add your semicolon. So when this function runs, we should increase the mynum variable by 1. So each time this function is called, mynum will go up by 1. And we'll make this public for now, just so that we can see the value when we run this function. And if we deploy this contract, if we click on mynum here, it should return 0. And if we click on the increase num function, we should see a green tick here. This means that the function was run. If you were running this on an actual blockchain, you'd have to wait for your transaction to be confirmed, and then you click on mynum here and it should be incremented by 1. So if we click that a few times, we should now see that mynum has gone up to 4. So now that we've seen how that works, let's look at how we create a read function. So now that we've seen write functions, let's look at how we create read functions. So we basically create the function in the same way. So we'll do a function, and we'll call this function viewNum, and we want to say that it's public. But when we're creating a read function, there's a few more keywords we have to add here. So we want to add view and returns. And this returns keyword actually takes a parameter, and that's what type we're going to be returning, so what type of variable. And we're just going to say uint256. Now I do want to show you something here. So if we were returning a string, it would give us an error if we try to save this. and that's because we have to add the word memory here. So remember, a string could be very long, so we don't really know how many bytes it's going to be. Whereas with an int, we know it's going to be 256 bytes or whatever we've set that to. So when we use string here, we have to specify that it's going to be stored in memory. But for our example, we're going to be using uint256. And this returns keyword is with an S, by the way. So inside of functions, we use return without an S. But as a keyword, we use it with the S. And now we just open our curly braces and we put the function code in here. So we just want to return, and we want to return my num. So if we save this, and now I've taken out the public keyword here from the variable. So if we deploy this, we should now see that the variable my num is no longer listed here because it's not public. And if we run the function view num, we should see that it returns 0. And if we run the increase num function a few times and then run the view num, we should see that it returns 3. Now, as I said before, if this was on a real blockchain, whenever we ran the view num function, that would be free because it's just returning a value. And if we ran this increase num function, that would actually cost us a gas fee since it's modifying data on the blockchain. But yeah, we'll look at that more in future tutorials. So in the next video, we're going to be looking at how we create a constructor function. So a constructor function is just a function that runs as soon as we deploy our contract.